The Kremlin is begging for mercy. They want negotiations with Trump that badly.
In response to Putin's representatives pleading to resume talks, Secretary of State Marco Rubio made it clear that Russia needs to change its tone and curb its ambitions.
Tensions are rising. The US is preparing to bomb Venezuela.
Previously, the US carried out strikes on ships in the Caribbean suspected of transporting drugs. Now, according to media reports, even tougher options are being discussed, including possible ground strikes on Venezuela.
The international economic platform J20 will go on without Xi and Trump.
We will have a J20 meeting in South Africa. South Africa shouldn't even be in the G20 because what happened there? It was bad. I'm not going there.
The system has started to devour its own. Kadyrov's men are cracking down on Z Patriots.
This machine will pick up such momentum that, of course, they'll all be stunned. Thank you.
Meanwhile, in the State Duma, important political issues are being decided.
Cheburashka is actually Jewish. He came from there in a barrel of oranges.
We'll talk about all this and more later on the YouTube channel Ukraine Today. This is the main news. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like this episode. So rumor has it that Putin has fled Moscow. The dictator sensed danger and bolted to Valdai, to his residence that's more secure than all of Moscow. We'll tell you how the bunkerman tries to keep up appearances, pretending to be with his people and not just relaxing far from the strikes of the Ukrainian armed forces.
The secrets of Putin's offices. It turns out that the Russian dictator has been hiding for years exactly where he is and from where he governs the country.
For the past 10 years, we've constantly seen Putin in this very office. The bright, functional office, covering 120 square meters, is located on the second floor of the new representative building in Novo Ogaryovo. Outside the window, there's 1.5 kilometers of forest. You can't just peek inside from the street. That's where Putin makes important calls, holds video conferences and meets with people. And according to Kremlin reports, Putin spent almost the entire 2020 to 2021 pandemic working there. Or did he?
After studying dozens of hours of broadcasts from the program Moscow, Kremlin, Putin, archives from the Kremlin website, government procurement documents, building plans, routes of Putin and his entourage, as well as hotel bookings and business trips of state TV employees. Journalists from the Sistema project discovered that since 2015, exact replicas of the suburban office have been created for the dictator to conceal his actual location at any given moment.
The Kremlin uses these replicas to create the illusion that Putin is working in the Moscow suburbs. In reality, a significant portion of the footage, supposedly from the Moscow region, was filmed in decoy offices far from Moscow.
As of today, at least 3 absolutely identical offices are known to exist in different parts of Russia. In Novo Ogaryovo in the Moscow region, the Sochi residence Bocharov Ruchi, and in Valdai. Each of them replicates the original interior down to the smallest details. This includes the color of the walls, the arrangement of the furniture and decorative elements, so that viewers cannot tell one room from another. The complex system of duplicate offices allowed the dictator to record addresses and hold meetings from different parts of the country, creating the illusion of stability and a constant presence in the same office. Despite the apparent identicalness of the rooms, journalists have uncovered small but telling differences. The height of the door handles, lines on the walls, and the arrangement of folders on the desk. It was these details that became the key to exposing the carefully concealed deception.
By drawing 2 lines, we can confidently say which room Putin is using. Here is Novo Ogaryovo, and here is the copy office. And again, here is the original, and here is the copy. S.
Since February 2023, Putin has practically stopped using the Sochi office after he began to fear strikes from Ukrainian drones. The Bocharov Ruche residence was once convenient and safe, but turned out to be vulnerable, and the dictator began looking for more hidden and protected places to work.
Despite the fact that several air defense positions have been set up there, it's still quite close to Ukraine, and the long-range capabilities of Ukrainian drone forces make it possible to cause a lot of trouble there. A lot of fun, so to speak. That's why Valdai is farther away, better hidden, and the topography there is better. Well, it's in the forest, it's a residence in the woods. And in Sochi, it's a residence in the mountains, in a fairly open area. It's got a view, you get what I mean, right? So when you build yourself a typical residence, you want to be able to see both the mountains and the sea. But it's not just that you can see the sea can see you a little bit too. That's why Sochi has dropped out of the list of his 2 favorite residences.
Since the beginning of 2025, the same fate has befallen the office in Novo Ogaryovo near Moscow. Now, Putin's addresses and meetings are recorded in 2 different offices, one in the Kremlin and the other at Lake Valdai in the Novgorod region. It was there that another office was set up. Journalists claim that the Valdai residence has become the main home for Putin's secret family, unofficially formed with gymnast Alina Kabayeva. There, the dictator could hold private meetings and record addresses, passing them off as footage from the residence near Moscow.
It also has its own distinctive features. The first is a switch. It is located exactly in the center of the panel, not like in the original at Novo Ogaryovo or in the copy in Sochi. The second is a seam on the wall, the one behind Putin's head. It is much higher than the panel joint. This office has its own writing set, its own unique pattern on the desk. In total, we found more than 150 photos of this office. Well, that's from the ones we were able to identify. Let's show once again how the 3 rooms differ from each other. In all 3 rooms, the seam on the wall behind Putin is at a different height. This is how the positions of the door handles differ. This is how the thermostats are arranged in different locations. And this is what the desk and the document folder look like.
Analysis of video footage and travel routes showed that, despite the appearance of working in Novo Ogaryovo, Putin could actually have been in any of the 3 mentioned offices. Journalists recorded how, on the same day, the president appeared in an office with one type of renovation, then a few hours later in another, and then back in the previous one.
Starting around 2018, there's been a process of complete merging between the personal comfort of the president's physical body, his actual body, and the needs of the state. In other words, the king's body ceases to be just a human body and becomes a vast state hyper-object, which includes clinics, secret residences, and a second family. In fact, alongside the first, his wife did get divorced. And all of this no longer works in the sense of, let's at least pretend that the president follows the rules and observes the ceremonial, but rather, let's arrange everything so that it's simply convenient for the president. And
while the Kremlin creates an appearance of stability and power, in reality, the Russian dictator is afraid. He is afraid of Ukrainian attacks, afraid of losing power, afraid of any signs of instability. About
Putin's fears and more. Next, we'll talk with Roman Tsymbaliuk. He is joining us live. Roman, hello. Very glad to see you.
Hello, Alexei. So what have you found out here? That Putin, just as he was a KGB officer, has essentially remained one. And yes, his physical whereabouts are a secret. And when I was still working in Moscow, asking the press office for the president's schedule, which, as is clear for heads of state, is usually planned in advance, was absolutely impossible. That is, even before the war, they would announce Putin's visit to a particular region of Russia literally the day before. In other words, he's been afraid for his own skin for quite a long time, and now I think it's absolutely justified. And judging by how things are developing, with all our pros and cons, and sometimes it seems like there are way too many cons, nevertheless, our military technologies are advancing. Technologies, primarily missile technologies, it's about time for him to build another residence somewhere on the other side of the Ural Mountains. He already has one there, but the bunker in principle can be further reinforced. And after this report, of course, they'll take things like panels and switches much more seriously so that no one can figure out where he is, who he's with, and so on.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Speaking of the schedule, Roma, it reminds me of Yanukovych in Ukraine, who also had a schedule on the president's website, and we used to pester his office and his press secretary about it back then. There too, it was always about working with documents, phone calls with partners, and some other nonsense. But in his case, all of this was justified and explained by his cyberitism, yes, and not a dislike of work, but a love of luxury and a life of indulgence. With Putin, of course, all of this is explained by fear. At Valdai, not at Valdai, deeper, even deeper. It doesn't matter where he's hiding now. It's clear that he's afraid and looking for hiding places. And that's also very good. But what kind of problems could this cause for him? The fact that the dictator is not in Moscow and he's very far from the levers of power. And after all, discontent is growing among those around him. So how could this end?
Well, if Yanukovych was a Sybarite, then obviously Putin is a hedonist. But all these years, he started living this way quite a long time ago, it seems to me, even before the full-scale invasion. Of course, back then, Russia didn't have so many problems or such a number of corpses, and he managed to fake it all, and we need to acknowledge that. But I, in a way, even understand. Here's the nuance. It's not just Ukrainians who want to take Putin out, Ukrainian special services. The thing is, the further it goes, the more he becomes an enemy of the Russian people. And sooner or later, even there, they'll realize it. And since he's getting in the way of so many other players living their lives, his whining about missiles. Do you remember how Moscow reacted when Donald even started talking about tomahawks? So the situation there was on the verge of a hysterical breakdown, an emotional one. So for now, I can't really make any predictions because this is, after all, an unpredictable situation. Are Russians, in principle, ready to overthrow him? Some groups of influence, maybe? It seems that for now the answer is more no than yes. Well, if they do become ready, and if there's some kind of internal unrest, then in theory, they'll drag him out by his feet and hang him, no matter which residence he's in. And again, I'll repeat this thought. They're always looking at Iran, for example. They were very impressed by how Israel took out the Iranian leadership. Sometimes it was pagers, sometimes rockets flew right into their apartments and all sorts of things like that. And they take all these aspects into account when planning routes and hiding places, some kind of bypass roads and so on.
Then I'm curious, Roma, to hear how you interpreted Rubio's latest statement that supposedly there's nothing left to pressure the United States with economically in terms of imposing sanctions. Maybe he was hinting at a different fate for Putin, that if we can't do it economically, then we'll have to use some other levers. No?
I think our American partners are kind of downplaying things a bit when they say they have nothing left.
That's clear.
But even in this statement, I personally see more optimism than the opposite, because sanctions have already been imposed on all Russian oil and gas companies. There simply aren't any left. And we need to pay close attention to Rubeva's words that now we will focus on enforcing the already imposed sanctions packages and on fighting the shadow fleet. So if we're talking exclusively about the oil sector, so this is what sanctions are. Because let's remember, Surgutneftgaz was sanctioned quite a while ago, but they still managed to trade their raw materials. Why? They found some ways to circumvent the restrictions, such as forging documents, using intermediaries, and employing various other methods to continue their operations and so on. Well, that's no secret, because at that time, the amount of Russian oil available on the global market did not decrease at all, remaining steady despite the sanctions. However, now we can clearly see that they are in trouble. No one wants to buy Russian oil anymore. It is just sitting unused in tankers that are part of the so-called shadow fleet waiting for buyers who never come, and so on. And if we're talking about sanctions in general, of course, we at Rubeo can help. First of all, there's Russian agriculture, there are mineral fertilizers, there's nuclear energy. They have a very large share of the global market there. Then there's rubber, aluminum. In general, there are actually plenty of areas where work can be done. And in my opinion, Rubeo's words really should not be seen as any kind of sign of weakness, because politeness and the important work of a diplomat should absolutely not be interpreted as them not being fully ready to exert pressure. In my view, what's happening now is a process that can be called exactly that, strangling Russia economically. And the signals coming from the Kremlin, which they are sending in various ways through diplomatic and open channels, are, let's negotiate, let's talk again. You misunderstood us. It's hardly a coincidence, because when sanctions were imposed on Rosneft and Lukoil, American journalists asked Trump, so what happens next? The answer was, we'll see in 6 months. Then Peskov made sarcastic remarks saying, yes, we'll see in 6 months. The sanctions are only beneficial for us. And then what happened. And so it seems to me that, strangely enough, we are close to a new round of Russian-American negotiations, or rather American-Russian negotiations.
Oh, well, there are questions about this new round too, because in the last round, if Peskov was being sarcastic, then Lavrov, judging by everything, basically told Rubio to take a hike with a rather suggestive twist. Pardon my frankness. And in my opinion, he ran into something serious. For several weeks, we all discussed it. where Lavrov was not allowed to attend the NASA summit without the Russian Federation. He wasn't let into the G20. Then he was finally given the microphone, and once again he started going on about denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine, and that their goals in this war remain unshakable. But according to the latest news, Russian-Kazakh negotiations took place in the Kremlin, and once again the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, was not allowed to attend. What do you think? Can we say that there really is some kind of movement happening in the Kremlin towers? And what fate do you foresee for him? Do you foresee anything?
That's not really our question, to be honest. Whether he'll be fired or not. He doesn't control issues of war.
He doesn't control them? No, but the infighting in the Kremlin and around Putin only works in our favor. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, he hasn't been fired yet. I'm just saying that for me, that's too little information. Whether or not a particular official shows up at some event, of course, everything needs to be analyzed. But as for why it didn't happen, I think it's too early to draw conclusions. And my conviction, and this is based on my time working in Moscow, is the following. Lavrov is, after all, an executor, a high-ranking one, yes, maybe of some elite breed, but he is not the creator or originator of these decisions. And by the way, here's another important remark, and it deserves to be made. We have joined the American sanctions, meaning strikes on Russian ports where Russian oil is transshipped, specifically Tuapse and Novorossiysk, which, as it turns out, both ports have been attacked in the past week. According to the president of Ukraine, our long-range Neptunes were actually sent to Novorossiysk, and there was quite a decent explosion there. So, first of all, this suggests that Putin probably won't be going to Sochi anymore. Hopefully never again. And secondly, that Russian oil on the world market is now being seriously targeted. I just want to remind everyone that the previous administration, some people liked it more, others less. I take it as a given. But they were categorically against us striking oil refineries, against, accordingly, all sorts of oil-related matters. Why, even globally, literally just one Neptune missile, a long-range one, or maybe more. Well, it's not said how many actually hit. Maybe there were more. It drove up global oil prices. And yes, there was a speculative surge, but still it was a 2% increase. That is, 2 Ukrainian missiles caused a 2% rise in global prices. And as for exports, 20% of tanker oil was going through Novorossiysk. So if that's what was being exported, well, it's like the Koshay's needle. This is the real point. So this is much more interesting than whether Lavrov is present or absent at this or that event. The fact that he came out, made a statement, and laid out those demands from February 24th, it actually looks not just funny, I'd say it looks absurd. They look pathetic. Already.
Quite senile indeed, as you can see.
4 years ago, or almost 4 years ago, everyone thought that no one would ever dare to attack Novorossiysk, to attack Russia at all. And now that Norm is burning, it's on fire. It's just a pity that nothing has reached Moscow yet.
Well, it will reach Moscow too. Regarding Koshay and the needle, you're right. From the latest news we've received, the port, the transshipment point in Novorossiysk, has stopped accepting oil and petroleum products for their transfer and accordingly their further sale. So yes, indeed, Ukrainian sanctions are probably the most effective mechanism of pressure on the aggressor country today. Roma, thank you so much for finding the time and joining us on air. Journalist Roman Tsymbaliuk was today's guest on the YouTube channel Ukraine Today. Thank you so much for that, and see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.